over the last few years, I found myself becoming more and more interested in speedrunning. After the advent of the YouTube content creators that really came in and gave speedrunning this awesome commentary scene, and there are certain creators I've really enjoyed over the past few years. You've got Summoning Salt, some incredible documentaries that he makes about world record history, for a variety of classic video games. I really love R. White Goose. I enjoy Karl Jobst content and a bunch of other ones, right? But the thing about speedrunning is there are elements of the community I like, there are elements of the community that I cannot stand, and it's quite strange because I'm watching the same thing happen to every grassroots community in our modern internet. It's that you get an initial spark where people are genuinely interested and really like entertaining material is being created. There's excitement, there's enthusiasm. And then, of course, the blue-haired Twitter deerkin, Gestapo get wind of what's going on. They come in and they impose all of this just misery onto the community, right? Because you can't have fun, you can't make jokes. There are certain members of the community that end up getting their history poured over with a fine-tooth comb, and then boom, yeah, they're canceled. And I watched that happen to first Ryan White, Goose, who seems to be absolutely hated now in the speedrunning community, purely for, some Discord records that were leaked about, and I think he was dabbing on the trans community or something, I don't know. He may have been being edgy or mean-spirited, who knows, right? But the fact is, that's all it takes these days, And that's sad because Goose has some amazing... I love Goose. He has the smoothest personality. He seems like a really good guy. He's very honest with who he is, and he's honest about his flaws. And I like the guy for that. I mean, he's discussed how his obsession with speedrunning caused him to, fudge the numbers at one point. He actually cheated back in the day, in the elite, the GoldenEye community, the elite. And, he laughs at it now, and he talks about himself as he was an edgy millennial, right? And that's kind of how a lot of us behaved on the internet 10, 15 years ago. But now, of course, even if you apologize profusely, publicly, you're done, right? So Goose has been persona non grata, which is a real shame because a guy like that should be embraced by the community. But unfortunately, no, the community now is run by people either of or associated adjacent with the trans identity movement, to the point where you cannot criticize, you cannot even express anything other than total support for the trans community within the speedrunning community, which de facto imposes this kind of woke Sharia onto any community where you have this kind of situation. It's the same thing that we've seen happen with gaming in general and other subcultures on the internet. They get infiltrated by this Janny class of trans, deerkin, communist, whatever you want to call them, right? They are ideologue leftists. They come in and they use their identity as this bludgeon to kind of get in, and then they're the ones on the council. They sit around deeming who can participate and who can't. And the most recent example of this kind of bullshit occurring in the speedrunning community is obviously the issue we've been watching play out with Karl Jobst, a longtime speedrunner, one of the greatest of all time when it comes to GoldenEye, in fact. One of the GOATs in terms of speedrunning, and I have a lot of respect for him. He's a good guy. Turbospurg, but you know what? That's the way it is. And he's been cancelled recently. Why? Well, he associated with Ryan White. And I think himself, he expressed some quote-unquote deplorable opinions about the trans community or whatever, but I mean, he's also being accused of associating with a Nazi because, Goose apparently is a Nazi. Now, I don't know why he's a Nazi. I mean, did they find a cache of photos of Ryan in full-blown SS uniform, LARPing around? Possibly. But, my gut tells me that he probably, I don't know, retweeted a Trump meme or something. I mean, I don't know, right? But unfortunately, Karl Jobst now is, he's just as bad as R. White Goose, and that's the way it goes. But the reason why this was kind of, this popped on my radar was because I'd heard that Karl and another speedrunning creator by the name of Tomato Anus, who was actually pretty good, I really enjoy his videos too, right? they were going to do a podcast together, right? Where it's going to be two dudes that know their shit. I like both of them. I'm excited for this podcast, so I'm waiting for it. Anyway, no, it turns out that Tomato Anus actually pulled the plug on the entire project after hearing about Karl Jobst's association with Goose and the fact that, oh my god, he said deplorable things, that, he denounced it and it was in private, and honestly, who gives a shit? But no. So, Tomato Anus has disassociated himself publicly from Karl. And I'm like, that seems a little harsh, wouldn't you say? I mean, he's washed his hands publicly on Twitter. He's released a statement just saying, no, I had no idea about the disgusting, vile history that Karl shares with known Nazi sympathizer R. White Goose. Terrible. I'm done, and I don't want to do the podcast, right? So, totally throws Karl Jobst under the bus. I watched Karl's video. He was pretty diplomatic about it. I felt like he almost sold Goose short a little bit by kind of giving credence to a lot of these accusations. He gave the narrative that Goose is actually this terrible person a little bit too much credit. But I do understand he is kind of stuck, between a rock and a hard place at the end of the day. Obviously, he has a huge channel on YouTube. I think he has over 1 million subscribers or something. His channel has absolutely exploded. And for good reason. It's incredibly entertaining, right? But here's the thing. He's now dealing with this fractured community where you have fans of speedrunning that are literally just in it because they're into the records, right? When you get into the GoldenEye speedrunning community, it is really, it has a rich history, which dates all the way back to like the late 90s. And, you can even find forum posts and records and everything. Like, it's been so well documented in such a loving way, and there's all that history there. And then you have this new identity faction of the speedrunning community, who, despite being quite small in number, I mean, I assume they are, just judging by the overall amount of trans individuals in this society, it's quite low, right? So, statistically, you'd think that they wouldn't have as much power as they do in the speedrunning community, and yet, I'm starting to associate the entire subculture with the trans community. I just feel like it's almost ubiquitous at this point. You tune into AGDQ and you would assume that this is some kind of trans-adjacent hobby, right? But it obviously didn't start like that. It was, hardcore gamers competing. There's a crossover with autism, and I'm not joking. I'm genuinely, pretty sure, there is a crossover between, and that's just the way it is. I mean, I think autistic people have certain interests. They're interested in things that are technical and how, the underpinnings of the game, the meta game, like that, has an appeal to the, the Aspergic mind, right? So there is a lot of cross-pollination going on here, in my opinion. And it's not just speedrunning, it's gaming, really. It's the connection between gaming and autism, and then the rise of the transgender movement. I guess the worst possible example of this would probably be Chris Chan. And I mean, he didn't phase into existence from some, Lovecraftian parallel dimension. He was shaped by this world. He was shaped by the internet. He's not alone. He's a symptom of something that's going on, in the West, in the 21st century. But the rise of the trans identity and the mainstreaming of these issues culturally seems to have coincided perfectly with this uncanny phenomenon of gamers and speedrunners and members of other kind of historically autistic niche communities deciding to quote-unquote transition. And I'm not calling myself Sherlock Holmes or anything, but I'm noticing some connections, some patterns here. I better stop noticing, because I have a history of noticing, and I don't think that's a good thing. So, yes, but perhaps it's the game itself that creates the seeds that bloom into the trans identity in speedrunning, perhaps. I mean, come on. The game itself is a grind. It's a grind that takes its toll on one's sanity, I would imagine. And, I can think of no other better example of this phenomenon than Narcissa Wright, aka Cosmo Wright, legendary Ocarina of Time speedrunner. And, he has a classic commentary video of one of his records on Ocarina of Time. And, His knowledge of the game is incredibly deep. His ability to pull off these glitches in real time, it's just incredibly impressive. Great video. One of the first videos that got me into speedrunning, as a matter of fact. But, like, just me even using, him, even me using his name Cosmo, they would consider me deplorable. I'm a horrible person for dead naming Cosmo. I don't care. I don't care because I simply am exercising my right as an individual to not accept someone else's frame of reality. I'm simply not going to accept that. I'm not going to throw away the achievements of one of the greatest speedrunners of all time just because he had let's be frank, a mental breakdown. He was a master of Ocarina of Time. He gave everything to that game in that speedrun, right? And he did it. He did become number one. He was champion. But for not very long, not long enough for it to even really mean anything, I expect, right? Because, Goose himself has described speedrunning as the most degenerate act a human being can engage in. He laments the time wasted, right? But it's all for the grind. It's for the glory, right? Because there it is, you touch God with a speedrun world record of Ocarina of Time, one of the most beloved games ever. And then not only is it taken away from you very, very hastily, but your personal life is melting down. Your girlfriend cheats on you publicly at AGDQ one year. You get defeated in a competition in front of your peers and your heroes, the Nintendo conference with John Numbers. Amateur gamer just completely wipes the floor with Cosmo. I think it was Mario Maker, like a race or something. Cosmo couldn't even get past the first screen. He choked completely and he was humiliated. He became a meme after that. I'm sure trolls were trolling him just with the footage. It was extremely upsetting. It's like I feel the secondhand cringe just from watching that video. But shortly after, Narcissa was born, and these two circumstances, there's no connection whatsoever. He was in a completely rational frame of mind when he decided to transition, okay? Just for clarification. And everybody can see how just horrible and depressing Cosmo's life has become now that he is known as Narcissa, right? And that's it. It's that you can't even choose just as an individual. You just choose to be like, no, I don't accept that Cosmo, a man, is now a woman. I don't accept it because I don't believe in this theory of gender fluidity. I don't believe it. I consider it some kind of aspect of postmodernism. It's an aspect of Marxism and leftism. It's mental illness, and it's gone too far. But here's the thing. Like, for me saying that on my YouTube channel, I don't give a fuck, right? I don't give a fuck because I don't have a livelihood at stake, like Tomato Anus, for instance. Because this guy, he actually performs live at AGDQ, He'll go to these conventions and he'll do a commentated speedrun and everyone claps and he's entertaining and this is his bread and butter, right? So, it's cowardice. That's the reason why Karl Jobst doesn't get to do his new podcast, right? It's cowardice because you can't even just tell these people, this identity faction that calls itself the trans community, you can't just turn around and go, excuse me, this is speedrunning here, so there's room for all different types of people. There's even room for people that don't subscribe to your postmodernist identity movement. You can't just keep banning and censoring every single person that doesn't outright support you and your choices. Only you can be comfortable with your choices. It doesn't seem like these people are really comfortable with their choices because all it takes is the association with a chill guy like Goose or fucking Karl Jobst. These dudes are not monsters. They're decent dudes. Not only are they decent, but they're luminaries of the speedrunning community, and there's no reason to cancel them. They just don't buy in to this trans agenda. They don't buy into it because it doesn't make any sense, and it's cultural colonization. Let's just call it like it is. See, they can use all these linguistic games to get their way and force their way into our spaces, and then they accuse us of being the gatekeepers. Let me just point something out here. They wouldn't have been able to infiltrate speedrunning if speedrunning had gatekeepers in the first place. There were no gatekeepers in gaming, there were no gatekeepers in Magic the Gathering, okay? In the Star Wars community, in the comic book community. That's a complete gaslight. It's a lie these people use as the foundation of their power grab. That's how it works. They accuse you of what they are, if they're not immediately guilty, they will be in the future because they are gatekeeping now. They're the gatekeepers and they decide who gets to participate. And looking back now, I think anyone remotely on the same page as me laments the fact that we didn't have some kind of cultural gatekeepers who could actually prevent our communities from being completely ruined like they have now, where it's just over. Before we even knew there was a fight, it's over because we're so used to liberal individualist thinking. That's who we are as millennials. We were raised with a certain perspective, and it was a live and let live perspective. And we thought, you know what? Well, as a community of gamers, we're cool with whoever wants to come game with us. That was always our attitude. And it turns out, unfortunately, and it's very sad that we've all had to learn this lesson, but that was naive of us. It was naive of us to believe that we wouldn't need gatekeepers and we would be treated fairly, and our rules and our culture would be respected. Because it hasn't been, and it was never respected for 2 seconds. It was bulldozed over. I love how they throw that label of colonization, colonizer, right? They hate that because it represents whatever, the history of Western Europe. But, they are literal missionaries for wokeism. And they've colonized every single subculture that ever existed on the internet.